I'm Isabel Hardman. I'm the assistant editor at The Spectator and I edit their politics blog, which is called Coffee House. So I've always been involved in student journalism. So I edited my school magazine when I was in sixth form, and then I was the news editor of my student newspaper at Exeter. And while I was at Exeter, I did work experience at The Observer, and they offered to start giving me freelance work when I was at the end of my second year. And that was how I really got into journalism, was I started being able to pay my rent with articles for The Observer. After university, I did a postgraduate training course in journalism, and then 6 months after that, I got my first job, which was very exciting, at a trade magazine called Inside Housing. I was a junior reporter. Actually, politics hasn't really been something I've always wanted to do. I wasn't particularly interested in it as a teenager, or really at university either. Most of the people I met who were interested in politics weren't really very much like me. They were either quite earnest boys, or they were people who did a lot of drugs and talked about Iran in kind of a knowing way, and I didn't really identify with any of them. I was obviously always very plugged into current affairs, so I knew what was going on politically, but I would never have described myself as political. I was always much more interested in social policy, and it was through studying social policy and writing about social policy that I became interested in politics, because that's what politics does, it creates social policy. I went to the 2010 party conferences and realised they were the best thing ever, which is a little bit sad, but thought they were brilliant. And it was at those conferences I thought I really wanted to be a political journalist, because it was something I really enjoyed. I joined the lobby in 2011, which is the team of journalists who cover Parliament, and then in 2012 I moved over to The Spectator. I really want to be a political journalist forever, because I think it's one of those things that you can't do really well until you've done it for years and years, and people in the lobby who've been here for many years have so much expertise and so many good contacts and important backstories. I think it's really important to have people who help you out in journalism. I think every journalist would say that there's been another senior journalist who's helped them along the way, and I certainly had that in my first experience as a journalist at The Observer. The consumer affairs editor there, Jill Inslee, really helped me out and gave me lots of tips and advice, and we're still in touch. And having those kind of mentor figures are really important. I think journalists who are able to report whilst analysing are the sort of journalists I really want to be like. So Rachel Sylvester's a columnist on The Times who she tells us all these fascinating stories about inside government, but she also analyses them and tells us why they're important. So at The Spectator, my day-to-day job involves covering Parliament, covering what's going on in the House of Commons, finding out the gossip from MPs on revolts that are coming up, arguments behind the scenes in the coalition. We put up about 8 pieces on Coffee House a day, and I normally write about 4 or 5 of those pieces. We tend to analyse the news as we break it, so if we have an exclusive, we won't just tell people that it's happened and that we found out about it, but what it means and what will happen next as well, which is quite an unusual way of reporting. And we'll often put our opinion into those pieces as well, saying, you know, this is a dreadful idea from the Labour Party or something like that. I don't think if you work for The Spectator you claim to have balance or impartiality. That's what the BBC do. We try to present things from a certain perspective. We make arguments about whether policies will work from the right, and we're honest about that, and it's much better to be honest rather than to try to claim you're being objective whilst pushing a partial world view. But I think the mistake people make is that they think that because you are right wing, that you then fit straight into a tribe. So being a right winger doesn't automatically make you agree with every single Tory party policy. It's impossible to be like that. The Prime Minister eats Coffee House every morning and can get very angry about pieces that go up that don't necessarily work in his favour, and we'll often get calls from Number 10 saying, you know, this isn't fair, or let's put our side of the story across, and that sort of thing. Personally, my heart is as a print journalist, because you get a lot more freedom to go and find stories, whereas with broadcast you're often having to set up your package and it will take you 4 hours to edit a 4-minute package. I find that quite frustrating. I like being able to go and talk to MPs in Portcullis House and then come back and write a really quick story, and the whole thing's taken me half an hour. I think personally most journalists and politicians are like cats and dogs. They're very different, they have very different instincts. There are politicians who were journalists, but often they always knew they wanted to be politicians and that journalism was the way to get there. You do end up becoming friends with MPs and ministers, and if you are particularly close to them and something bad happens to them, then it's difficult, and that's the case in every branch of journalism, is that you end up knowing people and understanding them as people rather than writing about them as sort of the enemy. But I think you do always have to try really hard to serve your readers rather than your contacts. That said, in Westminster, you do have a system whereby you take on a lot of confidence from people, and you often don't write everything that you know. Sometimes a minister will tell you something that's quite a big deal, but they'll say, please don't write about it yet, and you just have to abide by that, mainly because you hope that in the future that means you'll get a bigger story, or you'll be able to reveal the story later down the line when it's more convenient. There aren't that many women in political journalism, so the lobby's only 22% female, I think, but I don't think that's because it's difficult to be a woman and a political journalist. It's a very friendly place, the lobby. Political editors, as far as I've been able to work out, aren't sexist or anti-women. People are very friendly. There's no sort of old boys club atmosphere here. It can feel a bit like a boarding school in that it has lots of strange rules and we all do spend a lot of time together, but that's not a particularly unfemale atmosphere. I mean, I went to an all-girls school and I have to say that was much worse than the lobby ever will be. I think the problem is that it's okay when you don't have children, but I suspect that when you do have children as a political journalist, it's very, very difficult to be able to stick with the schedule of being a political journalist and to actually see your children. I think that's when women do tend to disappear